When he was a kid, his family bought a school bus and drove to Alaska, where they lived for 2 years. He spent several years researching primates. He ventured all around the world, writing travel guides and covering stories for CNN, CNBC, and National Geographic. And after all that, he started writing books about Star Wars and Marvel. Oh yeah, and then I didn't mention his grandfather was a famous biblical archeologist. My guest today is Adam Bray. I like to call him the most interesting man in the nerdery. This is Tatooine Sons.
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody was
Welcome to Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name an official Star Wars creature and be endorsed by the writer-director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation, that there is a story written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why I am honored to be joined this week by Adam Bray. Adam is the USA Today and Amazon best-selling author of nearly 20 official Star Wars, Marvel, and Lego books. He has also contributed to nearly 40 books on travel in Southeast Asia and has been called a modern Indiana Jones by CNN. From working with great apes to finding lost temple ruins in Vietnam to writing in a galaxy far, far away, Adam's adventures are they're frankly beyond epic. It's really hard to know where to start a conversation with a guest that has such a diverse background, but I couldn't help but ask him to explain how he went from working with primates to writing Star Wars and Marvel books.
Yeah, that was very roundabout. My interest in college in Star Wars was very casual. I sold my toys, unfortunately, to buy my first computer for college. And I always regretted doing that. And one effect that had was it kind of killed the intensity of my fandom for Star Wars. You know, I still liked it, but it was no longer like this central part in my life, largely because of that. And when the movies, when they did the special editions, it came as a relative shock. I don't think I knew about it until the trailer was in the theaters. Back in those days, we didn't have the internet and all that. Or the internet was just starting. Right. So I didn't have this plan to do anything with Star Wars. I was more interested in realistic, real world things. I just happened upon some books about chimpanzees. Jane Goodall's The Chimpanzees of Zombie, which is a big encyclopedia-sized book. Beautiful, amazing, groundbreaking book. I read Diane Fossey's Gorillas in the Mist, and then Farley Mowat's Woman in the Mist, which are both amazing books. I mean, anybody in the audience, if you haven't read them, you need to. They're really haunting, and they really hooked me. So then at that point, I realized that, okay, I was already getting a degree in biology. So I realized, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to work with chimpanzees because I couldn't figure out what to do with that degree. I thought maybe I'd become a vet because I had a lot of farm animals growing up. Goats and chickens and geese and ducks and ostriches and peacocks and monitor lizards and all kinds of weird stuff. But I realized they were always getting sick. We were always having health problems with the animals. And I realized I hated dealing with that. It was so depressing because a lot of them ended up dying. So I realized I don't want to become a vet, but this chimpanzee thing, I love this chimpanzee thing. So it didn't end up working exactly as I thought. I ended up working in a laboratory and funded by the National Institute of Health out in Arizona with 80 chimpanzees, who, interesting now it's relevant, they were initially created for AIDS research, though they never used them in AIDS because they discovered chimpanzees, they can get HIV, but they don't get sick. They don't get full-blown AIDS. So they weren't a good model. So they were never used for that. But what they were used was for vaccine research, a lot of them for hepatitis vaccines, hepatitis B especially, which I have that vaccine. So I worked there. Then I worked with bonobos and an orangutan in a language program in Atlanta. Very famous bonobo named Kanzi, who's in a lot of documentaries. Not so much, but especially during the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, he was on TV a lot. But I found that it was kind of a dead-end career. There was no option for promotion. I was making less, I guess it was technically minimum wage, but I had major student loans and I was just going into massive debt. And if you don't have a PhD, you're just kind of treated very lowly. And it was just, it's not a great career to be in without being on the academic side of it, the PhD university side. And I wasn't able to break into that end of it. So I decided I wanted to leave that, but I didn't know where to go. So I continued to study music for a year or two, which I'd studied on the side in college. Almost went that direction, but I'd been out of college for a few years and I just realized I don't like this academic environment. I don't like being told what to do, I liked studying, I liked learning, but I didn't like jumping through the exercises and the formalities and the exams. And it was just academia. So yeah, I was designing web pages, so I could make some money. With that, I was able to do that work from anywhere. Took that overseas and lived in the tropics in China and Vietnam. Did travel guides, it's funny, as a consequence of doing the travel guides, I got invited over to Rwanda for a tour of the country and ended up visiting the mountain gorillas in the Virungas where Diane Fossey had worked. So here, very roundabout way, I made it to originally what got me interested in the whole primate thing. I finally actually got to go to the Virungas and I met all the people working with her foundation, some of the people that I'd read about in her books. And I saw the gorillas and, went there and had this great adventure, very roundabout way. But as a consequence of being a travel writer, because I was over there, on the ground, I was able to, do the travel writing, got asked to do guidebooks for various publishers, worked for about a dozen different ones, and CNN, National Geographic, and BBC, and all these. But one of those publishers was DK. And so when I decided I was done with that, I wanted to come back to the U.S. It was just the right time, and asked DK if they needed a Star Wars author. And because of that experience I had under my belt, that I'd already proven myself, they said, sure. And Jonathan Rinsler was at Lucasfilm, who just passed away from cancer this past year. He was really instrumental in approving me and getting me at the high levels of the books and the writing for Star Wars very quickly, again, because of that experience. So it's a very roundabout journey. I don't know if there's a direct way to connect the chimps to Star Wars, although the very first book I did was What Makes a Monster, which was a kid's book about creatures in the Star Wars movies. And the editor told me they thought I was a good fit because of my wildlife background. So that's a little hook into it.
A little hook into it.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah. That's pretty awesome. Now, it's amazing because now you've written a ton of Star Wars books, you've written a ton of Marvel books, and this is kind of what most people like in the fandom world are going to know you for are all of these kind of information-driven books about these major franchises. But I'm going to take a left turn and veer off into a conversation that I'm not sure a lot of Star Wars and Marvel related podcasts have gone to with you. So as I was researching this interview, I learned that your grandfather was actually the biblical archaeologist, Dr. David Livingston, who discovered the biblical ancient city of Ai and corrected the location of the city of Bethel. Right. And I understand that you were even actually able to accompany him on one of his final digs. I have got to learn more about your grandfather and you and all of that. Tell me a little bit about that. That's so cool.
Sure, yeah. My grandfather, my grandparents, they were missionaries in Korea right after the war. My mom grew up over there with her siblings. And all through, she was there all through grade school and high school. On their way back from Korea, they stopped in Israel for like 6 months. And I guess my grandfather studied there and he got his interest in archaeology. One of the problems with classical biblical archaeology is a lot of the people who were interested in it, it's a funny thing, were not necessarily Christians. They're digging up biblical sites and biblical cities, but they don't necessarily regard the Bible as the Word of God. They don't regard it as true. They regard it more as legends and myths and, some hints at truth, but not necessarily correct. And my grandfather believed differently, that the Bible is the Word of God and it is an accurate record. So he decided there were a lot of sites that had been proposed for various locations in the Bible, cities. Through Bible history is, thousands of years that it spans. But a lot of them don't match the descriptions of the historical record in the Bible. It's surprising, we don't realize it if you read it casually, but if you study the geography of the Bible, it's very detailed, and the stories go back again and again, and they give all these little details, what was going on at different times and the relationship of one city to another, one country to another, one people to another. And there's actually a lot of information to pinpoint some of these things. And also there were historians, over thousands of years, there have been, historians. I don't know a lot about them myself because I've not studied it, but, I know there were people keeping those records. And there's things you can tie, in known history, that you can cross-reference. So my grandfather, he made it his goal. I'm not sure why. I don't remember why he settled on Ai, Bethel and Ai. And for listeners that aren't familiar, when Joshua and the Israelites, left Egypt after they were slaves in Egypt. Probably everybody's seen those movies, Moses' 10 Commandments, and that animated one from DreamWorks,
Prince of Egypt, right?
Yeah, great movie. Still, highly recommend it. After the Israelites left Egypt, they came into the Promised Land. Israel, it was promised by God in the Bible. And they had to, conquer it, take it from the Philistines. And I think the first cities they came to were Ai and Bethel. So my grandfather he focused on Ai. He wanted to find the location using the Bible, considering the Bible is historically accurate. So he did his research, and he got a map, and he found a spot that matched, everything and all the cross references, and started digging, and continued digging there for 30 years, and everything he found matched up. He'd go several times a year for those 30 years. My parents have been several times. I think my brother's been a couple times. I just went once in college and was on that dig. It's on the west bank of Israel at a settlement. It's called Sagot. Unfortunately, there's nothing. There's so much archaeology, over there, a place that's been inhabited for thousands of years, that a lot of these types of digs, they don't necessarily make a museum or a park or anything. So the settlements kind of expanded onto it. I think they might. I think the town maybe has made a small museum. I'm not sure. But I know there's a vineyard that is occupying a lot of the dig site now. And there were several caves my grandfather had dug out. One was famously used as I think both a wine press and an olive press. And it was a very famous cave for the archaeological finds.
That's awesome.
And I think they're using it as like a storeroom for the winery. So they're taking care of it. But yeah, my grandfather found a lot of stuff there that, that spans, centuries and maybe thousands of years, I guess. There's like a Byzantine fort there with the remains of a tower. There's one or two mikvahs, ceremonial, it's
like
where
baptismal location.
It's a Jewish baptismal. It's where our Christian baptism has come from. They found kilns where they made pottery, lots of pottery, lots of tombs, burials, lots of artifacts, jewelry, knives and spears and coins from all the different eras. One of the things my grandfather had to do was prove that it was occupied, because the Bible also says, it's got to be occupied during that time period when Joshua and the Israelites conquered. But the Bible also makes reference of later times, centuries later, when it was occupied by this group or that group. So my grandfather had to match that there were inhabitants of those time periods and those cultures on there. And you do that with the presence of, and you got to find undisturbed layers too. It can't be something that's, been dug up and tilled and worked. It's got to be, in the layers. But he would find the pottery. You date a lot of things with pottery and coins. And it's great, you don't get a lot, but sometimes there will even be writing, on a piece of pottery or a coin. And then that's great, because then, you understand a lot about what that artifact tells you. So yeah, he found a lot of stuff there over those 30 years.
It's awesome. So both Sam and Nathan, my sons, and I took both of them over to Israel when they were 13 years old, and we spent time
great.
over there. And my oldest and I, we actually dug outside of in a space outside of Jerusalem. It was from the Hasmonean period, so that period between the writing of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and we were able to participate in some archaeological work there. And he found what they call a complete piece of pottery and that kind of thing. It was really fun. It was exciting. So that's one of the sides of us on our show that we have, is where we, our faith, it informs the way that we view things like Star Wars and Marvel and these great epic stories. Everything that we do it passes through this filter of our faith. And it's obvious that you've got a background in your family of deep faith, especially with your grandparents being missionaries and things. How does your faith impact the way that you view things like Star Wars and Marvel?
Right. It's multifaceted. I appreciate Star Wars when there are grains of truth, when there's spiritual lessons and life lessons in it. I don't. There are some people that that will literally say Star Wars is their religion. It's not. I'm not that way. I'm not going to look to Star Wars or Marvel or anything else as a primary source for how to lead my life. But it's great. Truth is truth, and art is a great way to explore truth. And if an artist, even if they're not a Christian, if they've come upon truth, it's going to support me in my beliefs, as a believer. So, I welcome those insights. One of the greatest examples in Star Wars is just Luke Skywalker, willing to sacrifice himself for his father, in love and forgiveness, and just to lay down his life. And the fact that even though Darth Vader is, as far as we were concerned back in the 80s, he was one of the most evil people in the universe, only topped by the Emperor, who's kind of like a Satan figure. But Darth Vader, he's kind of, he's like a galactic Hitler. He's as bad as you can get. And yet, redemption and salvation is still open to him, because of belief. That is pretty powerful. That shows that no one is beyond saving. Even the worst people can be redeemed, and we're all of us are the worst people. So it's a really comforting thing as a Christian. So I value that kind of thing. And there's stuff sprinkled throughout Star Wars that make good object lessons. I don't tend to notice that as much in Marvel. It probably is there. It may just be a factor that I'm not asked about it a lot, so I haven't put as much thought into it.
Sure.
I think with Star Wars, George Lucas was, he's been very thoughtful about great truths and great stories, and modeling Star Wars after that. And the thing about the stories of the Bible and Christianity, and these truths, is that they get echoed throughout everything. So even if you're looking to other great stories in history, you're gonna, if they're true, if they've got truth in them, you're going to find it echoed. So it's, it mirrors each other. So it finds its way into Star Wars that way as well, even if it's not intentional. So I value that. But I also see where, things in Star Wars, or Marvel conflict, with my views. It may be the story, the creative, the creative material itself that conflict, or it may be the way that it's, presented, or portrayed or marketed outside of the story as well. Mm-hmm. So that gives me opportunity for discussion. Discussion and debate, and to share where I have a difference. That can be fraught with reaction and consequence. So
sure.
A lot of people will tread very lightly for fear of retribution in many forms. I think in increasing years, as our culture advances in particular directions, I feel more led to say, to say what I think and how my views lead me to reflect on that. So it's great for discussion.
Faith is more than just a personal belief system. It should change how we think and live. And Adam doesn't shy away from that. It's one of the things that I most respect about him. He's never ugly about it, but he doesn't apologize about having a different perspective and expressing it. Different perspectives shouldn't be feared. They should be celebrated. Otherwise, we can never learn and grow. My interview with Adam will continue in just a moment, but I want to take just a minute to thank our sponsor, Cufflinks.com. If you're not familiar with Cufflinks.com, all you need to know is that they have over 3,000 items, including cufflinks, ties, tie bars, and socks from all the fandoms you love, like Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, DC, Lord of the Rings, and more. We love Cufflinks.com because they're family-owned and run by a couple of brothers who geek out about Star Wars as much as we do. So if you want to help our show out and look great doing it, head on over to Cufflinks.com. Take a look at everything they have to offer, and be sure to use the code Tatooine15 at checkout to receive 15% off your entire order. Adam probably isn't wearing a lot of cufflinks while he's exploring the jungles of Vietnam or searching ancient villages in Israel, but I bet he could still find some cool items on Cufflinks.com that he'd like. Everyone who listens to Tatooine Sons regularly knows that we are unapologetic about our love for the greatest animated Star Wars series ever produced, Star Wars Rebels. Adam literally wrote the book on this galaxy-changing series. I asked him how that came about and why he thinks it's such a magical story.
The very first things I saw, I was in New Zealand when I was offered the book. I was there chasing Hobbit stuff, mostly out of my own personal interest, but I ended up convincing CNN to let me write about it here and there and a few other media outlets. So I was over there and I got offered the Rebels book. The very first things I saw were, I think it was images of Ezra and Chopper. And immediately I recognized, okay, Chopper is inspired by the original Ralph McQuarrie concepts for R2-D2. and other droids like the flat topped one that it appears with the Jawas, R5D4, kind of a combination between R5D4 and the Macquarie's R2. And I thought, wow, this is cool because he's got those little arms. And I also immediately noticed the color scheme. There were lots of oranges, orange on Chopper's head and on Ezra's jacket. Lots of orange and brown and yellow and green and kind of earthy tones. And this is the color scheme that a lot of Ralph McQuarrie's art for A New Hope had. And then I started seeing the other characters, Kanan and Hera, and Zeb was another big one because, wow, this is Chewbacca concept. So I was very excited, and this was a year before Rebels ever came out. So yeah, I was excited. It was like, okay, they've really gone back to the source for this. This is this is Dave Filoni's first thing since Disney took over. It's the first Star Wars anything since Disney took over, and they've gone back to the well, and they've done it really well. And then I read. They sent me a bunch of the scripts, for the first 5 or 6 shows. And that was cool because I'd really never read scripts. I'd never seen scripts for a show before. So I learned a lot about the creative process, and how these shows were made, by looking through this material. And then they let me see several episodes, and I got concept art. And it was all just very exciting. I couldn't believe that I was seeing this. That was the first time I'd ever been given confidential material. And I was just blown away that they were sending me all of this, because I don't think they do it now. I don't think writers get this stuff anymore. I don't think even the novelists are getting this caliber of
very,
material.
Very siloed off for everything right now.
Yeah.
Like I've even heard that Timothy Zahn talks about how he was never given any information about Thrawn from Rebels or any of that while he was writing the new version of Thrawn, his first novel or any of that. He has no clue what the future of Thrawn is in media outside of the stories that he's written. So. Yeah, that's bizarre.
Because they even sent me what they call the show Bible, which is a description of their concept for the show and their descriptions of all the characters, and their overall goals for the series. It's not like super detailed, but I knew Ahsoka was coming a year before anybody else, which was a big deal. And I knew where the series was supposed to end, which is not exactly where it ended, I'll say.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I think Rogue One basically came along, and that concept, because Rebels was going to incorporate some of, it was going to go up to that time period. And I think basically when Rogue One took over that, I think Rebels had to adjust course a little bit. Because they both, as we saw in the later episodes, they overlap a little bit. We get Saw Gerrera, and we get, they go to Geonosis, after, the Death Star, had been started there, and then they took the Death Star elsewhere. So there is a little bit of overlap. So, so that was, that was interesting. And it was, I don't think another author would have that opportunity anymore with Disney. It was exciting. I felt like they really nailed it. And I loved it. I did have some minor criticisms, like, I think they spent a lot of time on Lothal, and it felt the series felt a little small visually at times, and I think that was just because with any art, you've got limitations. I think, budget was a big limitation, it's working. I think George Lucas just didn't care so much about the expense. He honestly, he had a lot of money and he just wanted to make something that he loved. And, that's why Clone Wars got so grand, before he sold the company. So, but Disney's more money minded. So it was, you can tell by watching, the budget was cut way back, and they had to start from scratch because it was a new visual style. So one of the ways that Clone Wars grew visually and story wise is because they could use the same assets, over and over again. So as the seasons went on, they had more aliens, more ships, more locations to work with. And, they would also create new models for characters too. Like they'd create a new model for Ahsoka that was a little older, and a little more refined, and various characters. So, but as time, Rebels did get bigger by that last season. So, overall, it was a great, fun season. As I was honored and privileged to be able to take part of that, and it was great. When I did that book, that first Rebels guide, they sent me immediately to San Diego Comic-Con, and I'd never done a book signing before, and to do your first one at San Diego Comic-Con is crazy, because that's way up here. That's as big as it gets. It doesn't get bigger than that. So to do a signing there in the Lucasfilm Pavilion, and to have Dave Filoni coming to see me, and Simon Kinberg, who I'd actually interviewed those guys over the phone even before, and Simon Kinberg, that's like X-Men and Deadpool, and big Hollywood director, a writer, and he's coming to see me in my booth to say hi. And I meet the various actors, Vanessa Marshall, and, the various ones, and Taylor, Taylor Gray. Yeah, Taylor Gray. He didn't come, but his parents did. So that was pretty cool. Just to jump into the deep end of the pool right at the beginning was pretty amazing.
It's so awesome. It's one of those things where when you hear about all of the things that you've done, Adam, the working with primates, doing travel guides, covering Lord of the Rings and Hobbit stuff in New Zealand for CNN and other outlets, writing these types of stories for Star Wars and Marvel and all of that. I'm going to go ahead and crown you right now the most interesting man in geekdom. How about we go with that now? Is that cool?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take it.
One of the questions I always love to end these types of conversations with is, for you, how does Star Wars inspire hope? I think you already alluded to it some in a previous answer, but in a more specific, focused way, how does Star Wars inspire hope?
Yeah, I think particularly, I'm more mindful of it in the original trilogy. Some of the newer stuff is so fresh. I don't know if I've really thought about, like where the Mandalorian or Boba Fett or something like that takes me. But particularly with George Lucas's, the good good conquers evil, that, you fight for what's right, that you can come back from, the darkest things. The darkest people can be changed and saved. The darkest circumstances, you can come out of that and move past that and come to a better world and a better life, and be a changed person. I think it's Star Wars inspires, for the fans, it inspires a lot of creativity and thoughtfulness and art. I've become familiar with a lot of talented people, artists and musicians and things that are inspired by that. And that makes life more enjoyable too. So I think Star Wars it's been a very positive thing in our culture traditionally. It's brought a lot of good things. It's brought a lot of positive effects, and hopefully it will continue in that direction. I think the challenge when Star Wars is so big now, like Marvel, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There's a lot of directions they're going. There's a lot of content they're creating. So it's a challenge, not to water down the themes and the values, to keep all the tentacles of the octopus going in the right directions and positive directions. That's a challenge when something gets so big. One of the things I think about a lot in comic books, when you look at Marvel, when you're writing 80 years or more of comic books for a character, and for storylines, eventually everything that possibly can happen with the character will. Every possible story, every possible character development or regression, or every possible good thing, every possible inconsistency, it will all happen eventually, just because of how much time and how many different people are contributing. And that creates some good things, and that creates some things that are not good. And the challenge is to create as much good as you can, and not the other stuff. So that's a challenge, and that takes work, that takes effort and deliberateness. So I hope things continue well.
Adam brings up a really good point in that last answer. Star Wars became so big so quickly that sometimes we forget that up until the Disney era, Star Wars stories were told like independent films. George Lucas had complete creative control over all of the films, and he told the stories that he wanted to tell. He wasn't concerned with making financially successful films beyond having enough money to tell the next story that he wanted to tell. And the problem is now that there's a danger in this Disney era of kind of watering down the heart of Star Wars in an effort to bring in big dollars just to satisfy quarterly earnings reports. Star Wars is special because of these stories. That needs to continue to be the focus if the franchise can truly endure. I want to thank Adam for joining me this week. Make sure you check out adambray.com to learn more about his amazing life and pick up some of these awesome books. And thank you so much for listening to Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. If you enjoyed this interview, please take a moment, rate and review the show on your podcast app of choice. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on your app so you get every episode the moment it drops. Our next episode releases on Tuesday. We'll be reacting to Chapter 5 of the Book of Boba Fett, reviewing Season 2, Episode 3 of Superman and Lois, and maybe throwing in a little surprise topic this week. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. Make sure you follow the show on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss it. While you're at it, follow Tatooine Sons on Facebook and on Twitter. Share this episode with somebody else. That's how you help the show grow. We would really appreciate it. That's going to do it for this episode today. There's only one thing left to say.
May the force be with you always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Joy, please.
Yep, yep.